they will work with tons of data, distill it, and produce some things like infographics. I don't know if any of us are familiar with infographics. So you see a very nice image, and there'll be a call out here, and a call out there, and this means this. And sometimes it's used to represent survey data. I hope we are all aware. Okay, that's fine. So in Ghana, at least with what I have seen, very limited experience. I realize that journalists are, or it's more common for them to work with qualitative data. So the journalists will go out, interview people, and then get a story. They will interview a few people, so they'll take some pictures, highlight on a few emerging issues, and then write a very nice story together and present it, right? But this means that we are not taking advantage of the large body of data out there. Because right now, whether you know or you don't, there's data everywhere. There's data on Twitter, which our senior brother Elon Musk has blocked us from accessing. There's data on from the Ghana statistics body. There's data from everywhere. You understand that you can collect, mine, clean, and interrogate in order to develop interesting stories. So the main aim of this session is to introduce you to the art, to take you through the phases. Unfortunately, I don't have so much time, so we will not be able to do a full project, but I will talk through it and show you one. All right? I hope you are all with me. Yes. How was my introduction? Good. Thank you. Yeah, the organizers are trying to get some out. Alright. So generally, the idea behind data storytelling is to reduce the amount of cognitive load, right? So when people are reading texts, it's usually a lot, right? They have to scan the whole page from top to bottom, read the words, understand what the word means, and then try and get the point the writer is putting across. Isn't that the key? Right, beautiful. Please go to it. But with data storytelling, what you're trying to do is to reduce the time it will take for the person to understand what you're trying to say. So you are focusing on highlighting insights, and you are focusing on presenting these insights So you are focusing on highlighting insights, and you are focusing on presenting these insights in an intriguing, informative, captivating, and sometimes emotional way. Sometimes emotional way. So data storytelling is the art and science of building a compelling narrative. Extremely important. You have to build a narrative to carry your user through the story. And it's an art and a science because there is an art to it. Choosing the right font, choosing the right colors, arranging your text well. If you are not artistic, you may suffer. But it's also a science because there are actually guidelines you can follow. That will ensure that whilst you may not produce the best data story in the world, you produce something that is captivating and easy for the audience to understand. So by combining data visuals and storytelling techniques, data storytelling makes it easier for others to understand and engage with the information presented. Because at the end of the day, my understanding and my humble opinion of journalism is we want to make an impact in society with the stories we are telling. We want to drive people's attention to issues of consequence. For instance, during election, we want to let people know how well their MPs have done or how many times the MPs have been in parliament, all for the purpose of informing their decisions. Right. So data storytelling is about making your user understand the data you have as quickly as possible. Do I need a microphone?
Hello? Okay. So, it's quite unfortunate. Technology is failing us. I know. The keyboard is not really stable. Okay.
But generally, statistics are good for describing or understanding large data sets. Does that make sense? So maybe you have a survey, you have some data from somewhere, and it's about 10,000 people, it's about 15, 20,000. Sometimes it could even be about 800 people, right? The traditional approach would be to scan through the rows and identify what's going on and try and understand how many people who said A also said B, right? That's a very long way and a very tedious way to make sense of your data. So we'll try and use some statistical approaches to simplify our understanding of the rows. So one very simple statistical approach was percentages, isn't it? What percentage of people say this compared to the rest of the people that said that? Does that make sense? So these are some very basic statistical techniques you use in data storytelling to enhance the data. Another thing you need to know when you're doing data storytelling, invariably, you'll be using charts or images. So a very important thing to know is which chart to use for what type of data. Because if you want to show a count, right, and you want to show count of various categories, then it makes sense to go with a bar chart as opposed to a pie chart. Does that make sense? Right. So a very important thing to know is which charts to use for which data you're trying to communicate. Now, one of the advantages of data journalism is because you are working with data, with raw facts, right? Obviously, we all have our opinions and biases, but you can stand behind the data and say, this is what the data is saying, and this is what I'm presenting to you. So it adds a little bit more confidence, a little bit more credibility to the story you're putting across. It's no longer based on your opinions and your personal observation. It is based on your understanding and interpretation, because we cannot do away with interpretation, can we? Someone will say, is the glass half full or half empty? The data is that the glass is 50% full, isn't it? But an optimistic person will say the glass is half full, and a pessimistic person will say it's half empty. So we cannot fully do away with our opinions and our biases, but we can stand behind the data and say, this is what the data is saying, and this is what I'm presenting. So we look at statistics, we look at graphs, and then we look at compelling visuals. Because remember, I spoke about the fact that we need to connect with our reader. We need to drive understanding and make an impact. So sometimes the visual could actually be a picture with a little bit of text underneath. Sometimes the visual could be a graph with a little bit of text by the side. Or sometimes all you need is a very big image and it will drive home the point. But that image is being presented because of the understanding of the data behind it. Does that make sense? There's a data story I saw some time ago that was showing the number of deaths in the America-Iraq war, right? And it was a very long picture. And the designer had used red. So it was basically, I hope you all know what a bar chart is. So there are bars, right? And the higher the bar, the higher the number of people. So in this chart, the designer had turned the bar chart upside down. So as you go across the years, the number of people who have died increase. Does that make sense? Therefore, we see red representing blood becoming more and more and more and more and more on the chart as we move along. So it drives home the point. So you don't even need to look too closely at the graph. You look at the title, you look at the red, and you know what's going on. People are dying, and they are dying in larger numbers as time goes on. That is the power of data storytelling. So, what role can data storytelling play in journalism? One, it helps you to uncover hidden patterns. Because what happens when you use graphs is that you are able to quickly see if there is a trend in something. Or you are able to quickly see if something is not going as you expected. For instance, you may be in a rural community, right? And you expect that there are a lot of farmers there. But you go there and you do a quick survey and you compare the percentage of farmers to, let's say, fishermen or carpenters. And you realize that there are more carpenters than farmers. This goes against your assumptions or your expectations. So it enables you to quickly uncover hidden patterns, which you would not have known if, for instance, you are going person by person interviewing them or just looking at a long sheet of data. Another thing I think I've already spoken about is to provide evidence-based reporting,
right? So by basing your stories on solid data, you get to stand behind the data and say, this is the evidence for my data and for my story, and this is what it means. It also allows you to contextualize the news, because one of the important things about data storytelling is the narrative you bring to the data, right? So it helps you to drive home a point because you present it in a certain context that is meaningful to the reader, right? And assist them in making some decision or understanding something that is difficult, and is also engaging to the audience. Hopefully, I'll be able to engage you with one or two examples. It also helps provide accountability and transparency, because if you do a data story, you have to tell us where you got the data from. The advantage of data stories is, I don't mean to be disrespectful to the media professionals here, but you can't say I'm hiding my sources, because it's data from somewhere, right? So maybe from a public institution, a private institution, a data set online. So we know actually where the data is coming from. So it provides more credibility. And it also holds you accountable, because I can also go and get the data and do my own analysis. And I'll see if you are lying or not. So what are the elements of effective data storytelling? One, you need a clear narrative structure, because you need to be able to carry your user or your reader from one point to the next. You need to carry your reader from obscurity to enlightenment, to not knowing a lot or not caring a lot about something, and then to making the person intrigued and giving the person enough information to understand. Another thing you need to do is to focus on the audience. And I think by virtue of your experience, you already know when you're writing, you have tone, right? The tone you use for formal communication is not the same tone you use when you're communicating with your peers or you're doing informal communication. The same way with data storytelling. You focus on the kind of audience you are designing the story for, and you choose the visuals and the text accordingly. Another thing is you need compelling visuals. So you have to choose the right graph. Then you have to configure the graph appropriately. Choose the right color, the right font, the position, all that. You need to be able to sort it out. And you need to be able to communicate the story in a way such that you can create an emotional connection between the reader and the data you're presenting. Next slide, please. So what types of data stories can we have? Because we are using data, right? Remember I said we are using some statistical techniques. It actually enables us to do a whole host of things which would previously not have been able to do. The normal percentage, average, beginning statistics thing, right? Those can be used for descriptive stories. So you want to describe what the data is telling you from your perspective. You do descriptive stories. But if you are a little bit more technically inclined, or you work with someone who has technical expertise in terms of statistical modeling, or they can do some programming, then you can do predictive stories. There's one data story I'm going to show you now, where they are able to sort of predict how someone will vote based on their demography, right? So that is predictive data storytelling. Then you can do diagnostic, which also requires a higher level of technical expertise. And with that, you are trying to explore why. You are trying to diagnose. Why is the data telling me what it's telling me? And you can do prescriptive stories where you provide actionable recommendations. There's one very interesting data story I saw about animals going extinct. And they tell you the class of the animal, genus, species, etc., where they live, the kind of habitat they are in, why they are going extinct, and then they can prescribe what they think should be done. So what are the steps for effective data storytelling? If you understand this slide, we are done. Right? You gather your data. Very simple. The challenge here is because we are now doing these things, some of the data sets we need to build ourselves. So for instance, you have a data set of houses in a certain locality, right? You may need to go to Ghana Statistical Service to get more data on, let's say, the income range or the income bracket of the people in that locality. And then you can marry that with maybe data from the Ghana Health Service on the common illnesses reported in that locality. And then you can do a very nice story that tries to examine how the income range affects the kind of treatment they get when they go to the hospital or something like that. Does that make sense? So you have to be, so the first part is gathering your data, you have to be a little innovative and a little creative. What kind of story do I want to tell and where is the data? But the interesting thing is there are online repositories where people have already gathered data. So you can go there and explore. If you find some data, like I have one here or two, I'll show you. You can get an interesting story out of that, right? So one website called Kaggle, Kaggle. That's a very large collection of data sets. So you can explore, and then if you find something interesting, you work with it. The second thing is to identify your audience, because I think I've spoken about tone and now how audience-centric data storytelling is. Then the third thing is to choose a story structure. You people are writers, I'm sure you know more about this than I do. But there could be various structures in your story. For instance, you may have a setup, confrontation, and resolution. So you set up a problem, you provide enough context for people to understand the problem. Then you confront them with how relevant the problem is to them, and then you provide a resolution or a solution to the problem. Another one which is more suitable for complex situations is to come up with introduction, rising action, climax, falling action, and resolution. This is also a nice data structure you can use. Then you have to choose your visual. So I have now gathered my data, I've decided on my audience, I have a structure in mind. What do I present first? And how do I present it? You see, so the first thing I want to present a comparison of the men and women in the area. Okay, such a comparison ought to be appropriate. Do I use a pie chart? Do I use a pie chart? Do I use a bar chart? Do I use a scatter plot? You will see all that later on. So you choose your visuals and then you create your narrative. So if you want to show it statically, meaning that in total, all these people, or in total, all these categories, right? If you want to show that, you can use any of these graphs. This is a donut chart, pie chart. I think there's a name for this. Yes, this is a stack. Thank you very much. A stack bar chart and a stack column chart, and so on and so forth. The important thing is not to chew the names or not to know the names, right? But to have in mind that these are the kind of graphs you need to do these to achieve these kind of goals. So when it's time to implement your data story, you can just reference this online and then plug in your data and it will show. Are you with me, please? Right. So there are so many. If you want to show anything about geography, location, you can use any of these. If you want to show change in time, you can use any of this. If you want to show change but at an instant, you can use any of this. If you want to show one single number of households, median income, average height, you can just use a big card and then you put the number there. Right. So let's go. So you're going to look at an example, right? You can actually type this URL and go through the example with me. So The Economist has a data story on how to forecast an American's vote. So we are going to step through and see how they put it together and look at some of the graphs and why it makes sense. So that if you go forward, we can also do our own. So let's look. All right, so the use of data storytelling is particularly noteworthy because it actually complicates a very complex idea, because predicting the vote of someone is not easy, right? There are so many variables you have to take into account, but they actually make it look quite simple. Additionally, the story is told using charts, and the data represents the output of a statistical model. So I'm sure most of us have heard of machine learning and AI. Yes, you can actually have that in your data story, but how you present it will make it very easy and very simple. We'll show you soon. So the story demonstrates how to use statistical modeling or machine learning coupled with data visualization to tell an interesting story. So the evidence, where did they get the data from? And this is why I was saying that creating data stories allows you to stand behind the data and let the data speak for itself.
So the data was sourced from a collaborative effort between The Economist, a very reputable news organization, and YouGov, a well-known polling organization in America. So they have been conducting weekly surveys of 1,500 Americans. So you can imagine that the data set is large. Then the narrative. So how did they structure it? The story explores voter behavior analysis, highlighting the contradiction between the historical vision and contemporary trends. So we compare social characteristics such as rural and urban dwellers, married and unmarried people, etc. And the comparison is done in a sequential way. So it makes a lot of sense. So let's take a look at this graph. Very interesting graph. You see, this is where the art part comes in, right? So this is what you call a diverging bar chart. That is the science part. A diverging bar chart is good for showing differences in the same data set. Does that make sense? So basically, everybody here is either voting Republican or Democrat. So Republicans are red, Democrats are blue. Does that make sense? Now, the arrows at the tip are just arbitrary. They don't need to be there. But it makes sense, right? It shows you that if you are in this direction, you are moving more from being a Democrat towards being a Republican. Does that make sense? So the arrow gives a sense of direction to the graph. The graph will still make sense without the arrow, but putting an arrow there gives a sense. It means that there is a general movement in this direction towards being a Republican, and there's a general movement in this direction towards being a Democrat. Now, the question is, how far will you move towards being a Republican or a Democrat based on your features? So we can clearly see that race will move you very far as compared to education. Does that make sense? Your race tells a lot whether you become a Republican or a Democrat as compared to education, as compared to your region. So we can immediately tell from this graph that race is probably the biggest predictive factor of your political stance, right? And then we can also look at it and do analysis and say where you live, the population density of where you live plays a more important part than your education or your sexual orientation. So you see, we are telling so much without typing even one paragraph. You are giving so much information out. Does that make sense? And this is the power of a data story. The person can actually analyze and understand in so much detail, but within a short period of time. Let's look at the next graph. So this is where the statistical model comes in, right? So this is actually like a machine learning model. And these are the variables that you provide to the model. So you can select any race here, and then you can select any religious stance here, etc., sexual orientation, gender, age, range, all that stuff. And then it will calculate the percentage of the person voting Democrat or Republican. And that's based on the statistical modeling I spoke about. So if you have, or if you are in touch with someone who knows how to do that, he can build a model for you, and then you slap a website in front of it. So when the people make their choices, is to send it to the model, and the model will bring back the results. Right. Let's see the next one. And this is also a very interesting graph of what would it take to make someone move in the opposite direction. What would it take? Once again, it has a similar structure, right? What would it take for the average Democrat to become a Republican, right? And we see that as they become white, the percentage increases. If they are born again and church going, the percentage increases. If they are female, the percentage decreases. If they are below 25, the percentage decreases, and so on and so forth, right? Over here on this side, if they are black, the percentage increases of being a Democrat increases. But if they are born again and church going, it decreases, and so on and so forth. So this is also a very compelling way and visually stimulating way to communicate. So they've told a very interesting story in 3 graphs. Have you noticed that? And it's a very detailed story. And you can probably pour over these images for days, trying to extract meaning and understand what is going on. And maybe because we are Ghanaian, so most of us are not intrigued, but this is actually very intriguing. Like, why? Why are born again Christians more likely to be Republican than Democrats? That's a very interesting observation. Anyways, let's go to the next data story. So the second data story is actually I chose this because one of the things that we can do with data stories is to use multimedia pictures and videos, right? And actually, I think it is very easy to use pictures and videos because if you are able to get or create a compelling picture, all you need is a little bit of text to drive home the point. Does that make sense? And I think traditional media already knows this, right? Usually, when there's a big story, there's that one picture that comes with a headline, and then the rest of the story follows, right? To capture your attention and drive home the experience. So we can do the same with data stories. So this data story was developed by Simon Scar, and he was trying to talk, next slide, about how much plastics we are all consuming. Because the idea or the general notion is that because of pollution, plastics are everywhere. And because plastics do not degrade, they end up breaking up into small bits and they get into our food and our water, and we end up ingesting these things. So his story is to basically let us know how much plastic you are likely to ingest just by living your normal life. And the impact that is going for is to bring our mind or to draw our attention to pollution and its effect, and how inadvertently we are all poisoning ourselves by polluting the environment. So let's see the story and let's see if next. So this is the source for the data. He got it from a research conducted by University of Newcastle and the World Wide Fund for Nature. So let's go. All right. So I've taken his images and I've crafted visualization. So let's see. Next. So within a week, you are likely to eat 5 grams of plastic, right? That's as much as this spoon. Next image. Within a month, you eat a small bowl of plastic, likely, right? That is shown by this image. Every 6 months, you eat about 125 grams. That's almost as much as your morning cereal. So you can imagine your cornflakes and your, mixed with a little bit of plastic. Every year, you eat a plate full of plastic. Every 10 years, you eat as much plastic as is contained in, is that called a life buoy? Yes, a life buoy. And by the end of your life, 2 bins full of plastic, that's 20 kg by the end of your life. Now we are emotionally connected to the story. Exactly. Small plastics are swimming in our blood. So drink a lot of warm water. Please, this is not medical advice, I beg. All right. So these are some resources you can run. So if you want to try your hands, you can just note these down and go online and look at them. You can't see, unfortunately. Okay. So one is called Data Wrapper. Data Wrapper. And we have Flourish and we have Tableau Public. Tableau is a bit more on the technical side, but it's still drag and drop, so you can figure your way out, right? You just need a little bit more experience, so a little bit more patience. Then there's Google Data Studio, and there's the Data Journalism Handbook. This has been going on for a while. Data journalism is not a new thing, so there are resources all over the place, right? Written by actual journalists that will guide you and provide more information. So to round up, I want to show you a little data story I created. Who wants to be rich? Fantastic. So I have done my research, as a seasoned journalist with 0 years experience. I have been combing through the internet and talking to people and searching for data on how to become rich. And you see, the answer I have found is not just going to make you rich, it's going to give you $1 billion. So how do you make $1 billion? That's the question. It's very simple. All you need is a camera. Because for the past 5 years, the film industry has experienced an unprecedented surge in profitability in movies. Movies are becoming increasingly lucrative, and a lot of movies are breaking the $1 billion barrier. So we are going to become movie producers. So I'm going to show you how to produce. It's not just any movie. The movie has to have some specific characteristics to break the $1 billion barrier. Okay, please scroll down. Let's start by looking at the biggest box office hits in the past 5 years. Avengers Endgame made $2.8 billion US dollars. Avatar, The Way of the Water, $2.32 billion US dollars. The movie that didn't make a lot of money was Jurassic World, which most of us, I'm guessing, have not seen. And even that one made, you have seen it. You are the only person. And even that one made $1 billion US dollars. So it means that my method will work, won't it? Okay, so let's see. The first thing is that, scroll down. The movie must be in English. So if you are thinking about a Comerwood movie, give up. According to the data, give up. The movie must be, because 100% of all the movies we just saw are in English, right? So that's the first thing. We are on our way to making $1 billion. Okay, let's scroll down. Let's see the next thing. Scroll down. So this is called a word graph, right? It shows us the words that are occurring most frequently in a data set. So what I did is I put the genres in here. It's called a word cloud, actually. I put the genre of the movie in there. And the more popular a genre is, the bigger it will be. Does that make sense? So it means that the most popular genre is adventure, followed by fantasy, action. Then we have crime small over there. So please, if you are thinking about writing a love story, give up. A love story will not make you $1 billion, please. Don't even start. If you are thinking about writing crime, you want adventure. You see, people fighting and doing this and a large conquest. And, if you look at the movies, people have, I think a lot of action movies in there if you go up. Okay, let's go down. There's a small problem though. You need to spend money to make money. Because according to the research, over here, Spider-Man No Way Home, the budget was $200 million and it made $1.9 billion. Okay, come here for me. The Lion King, the budget was $260 million and it made $1.6 billion. Okay, but you see, we are ambitious people. So let's go up. Avengers Endgame. The budget was $356 million and it ended up making $2.7 billion. We need money to make money, unfortunately. So let's scroll down. The last trick is, when should we release the movies? Because apparently it counts. Because, come here, there's 5 billion, and then June, that's 3 billion. So 8 billion was generated in December and in June. So if you think you are going to release a Val's Day special in February, give up. So by virtue of our analysis, we have drawn a very simple conclusion. In fact, I think within the next year, a lot of us should be billionaires in this room, because all we need is about $300 million, a movie, a script in English, right? About an action or an adventure movie, and we'll release it in December, and we are rich. True or false? Thank you very much. This brings me to the end of my presentation. Any questions, please? Hello? Any questions, please? I think my time is up anyways, yes. So let's quickly round up. The next presenter is here, so yes, please. Yes, it makes sense. I think that's where the money comes in. You see, when you have a lot of money, you can get some high-profile people to star in the movie. So I think you're also right. So maybe I should add that to my analysis. Any more questions, please? Yes, please.
You mentioned that in as much as your data story should be very informative, it should be visually compelling too.
Yes. Yes.
And then you mentioned some factors that go into your representation.
Yes.
I want to ask if it's necessary to prioritize some factors over other factors. Like
Okay.
in the example that you made of the America and Iraq war,
Yeah.
you made an example of a data story on that. And you said the creator used red, the color red, to represent the deaths, and then use the bar chart also, but turn the bar chart upside down.
Yeah.
So, I mean, ideally, a bar chart is supposed to, the bars
Yes.
are supposed to go up,
Yes.
but he did it the other way around. And then, I mean, that's the picture that you gave us. So here, I feel like the moment anybody sees the representation, red is the first thing
Drives the
that,
point home. Yes.
yes.
Yes,
So
yes.
in that case, did the creator prioritize some factors in the representation over some other factors?
Ideally, you should. And this also comes back to focusing on your audience. What do your audience care about more? How can you hook your audience more? You see, and if you look at the context of his story, it's about war. And he wants to, his perspective is to draw attention to something that is very alarming. And so he goes with red, uses a bar chart, which is increasing over time. You see, so that makes a lot of sense. Generally, however, focusing on color alone as a key differentiator in your graph is a bad idea because some people are colorblind. So you need some other cues to help the person make more sense of the data. So in as much as you have color, maybe size will also. That's why if you look at my image on how much money you need to spend, you realize that the more the money you need to spend, the bigger the bubble is. Exactly. So color is important, size. So what will happen is you have to play with a couple of variables until you arrive at something that is suitable for the story you have and the audience you are trying to communicate to. Yes, please. Let me know. Okay. If there are no more stories, before this session, we had an orientation. And we were saying that one of the things they wanted to see was engagement in the ecosystem. So, as Apercu Consulting, I'm willing next quarter, this quarter is already tight. I'm willing to work with anybody here on a data story for free. So in case you are interested, just let me know. If you have some data sets, we can quickly put an interesting story together for your media organization or anything you're interested in. All right. So, which means that January, February, March, that's when we'll be doing the work. So in case you're interested, let me know. And before I go, I'd like to quickly show you something. Go to the Power BI. Go to the data set. Yes. So this is the data I use for the movie visualization. Right. Sometimes the data can look very mundane. It's just a collection of movies and the amount of money they made and when they were released, right? Very mundane. But your perspective counts. Does that make sense? You will bring life to the story. So how you communicate it, what perspective you take, the context, how you present it, the graphs, all of these will make it interesting. Okay. Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of the day.